I want to start this talk with a promise that by the end of this talk, you'll be inspired to live your life a different way, prioritize important matters in a far more effective way, simply because you understand history and your influence upon the future. I'm going to start by telling you two stories. One about world history and one about personal history. And both stories can teach us something about our general expectations of the future and how they are wrong, and our influence upon that future. Just weeks before the Second World War, a German scout plane crashed on the Dutch border. On board this plane were the plans for the invasion of the Netherlands, Belgium, and France. These plans were picked up and brought to Army intelligence, and Dutch Army intelligence dismissed these documents as being unrealistic. Surely, they said, our brotherly German neighbors wouldn't do such a thing. With that, they had let their chance to write their own future pass. Until now, all we can do is wonder, what if? The second story is of a woman who knew that she was going to die, and of a daughter who knew her mother was about to pass away. Both mother and daughter lived lives of great sadness, and both expected the other person to come to them to make amends, and neither of them did. The woman, who was my grandmother, passed away, and as a young boy, I watched the daughter, my aunt, break into pieces in front of a closed casket. No amends were ever to be made. She had let her history write her future up until the point where all she could do was wonder, what if? Humans are extremely poor at predicting the future or at creating the future we want for ourselves. We could have the plans for a war coming our way in our hands and still dismiss them. We could be facing death and still assume the future will be fine. Today I'm going to talk to you about learning from the future. Now, I am a historian, and you might argue a historian is the person least fit to talk to us about the future. But if you want to speak of the future, we have to start in the past. Because if we don't understand the past, then we won't understand the present. And if we don't understand the present, we are in no position to predict the future. Those who do not learn from history are indeed doomed to repeat it. And we need to understand this to make sure we don't end up in an endless, useless cycle of mistakes repeated. So first up, what is history? The common misconception is that history is everything that ever happened, everything that came before. It isn't. History is not everything that ever happened, it's everything written down about the things that happened. Now, this might seem a little nitpicky, but it is an important thing to understand. You see, millions of things that happen on Earth are forgotten and cannot be studied centuries later. Thousands of things happen every day without a witness or without being written down, and they are lost to time. Now, as I was preparing for this TED Talk, I figured that any serious talk about history needs some graphs and numbers, so I went and prepared some graphs and numbers. Here they are. This shows the history part of everything that ever happened on Earth. And as you can see, or as you won't be able to see, it's not that much. It's about 4.5 billion years next to about 20,000. So this is the history part of everything that ever happened to Homo sapiens, our species. And again, as you can see, it's not that much. So history is limited to what has been written down. Therefore, the period before humankind developed any form of writing is known as prehistory. And it is the historian's task to study these written sources so that we can better understand the past. And if this is done well, this will eliminate doubt and assumption. Because much like Dutch Army intelligence assumed there wouldn't be a war, we make assumptions about our past, present, and future all the time. To illustrate, I have a very simple question to all of you. Raise your hand if you know your date of birth, your birthday. Do you know when that is? Right, so everyone. But what if I told you you don't know? You don't know your date of birth. You just assumed your parents told you the truth. You've never checked this. You've never seen your birth certificate. And even if you had, it's the number on a piece of paper. What does that really prove? You've probably never felt the need to fact check this piece of information because you trusted your parents on this. My birthday is the 11th of April. I turned 33 this year, I'm assuming. And that's just the thing. You don't know, you assume. We believe something because we trust the person that told us the thing. We see no reason to doubt it. But if we don't know our date of birth, what else do we not know? Do you know whether the earth revolves around its axis? Or did you just assume that to be true because your parents, your teachers, and NASA told you? Just like people in, say, the 14th century thought they knew the earth stood still at the center of the universe because the church told them. We're not so different from them. Now, for purposes of this talk, I have tried to find one general assumption to illustrate how far assumption can reach. And it is this. It's prehistoric hunter-gatherers. And the assumption is this. It's men holding spears and axes and weaponry, hunting material, and women making clothing, taking care of babies, plucking berries. Do you know what this is based upon? This is based upon assumption, on absolutely nothing. This is an 18th century bias of the, I'm guessing, very insecure men who were archaeologists at the time, and they thought the gender roles that we know must have been there forever. They figured we men, we were hunters, we were warriors for all time. And they made this assumption while wearing fancy clothes, drinking brandy inside their aristocratic homes. Now, what would happen is they would find a prehistoric burial ground with male remains next to spears and axes, and they would say, well, there you have it. Men, we were warriors, we were hunters. And then they would find just as many female remains next to spears and axes, and they would say, well, that's odd. That is strange, an anomaly. How do we explain this? Were they dusting off the weapons and did they die on the spot? The truth is, prehistoric society was far more complex than we've always assumed, which led us to assume that the complexity of our society is a modern thing, but it isn't. Now, assumptions are also a great way to embarrass yourself, unfortunately. I remember when I was in university and I attended a class in classical Latin, the language of the Roman Empire, and I distinctly remember standing amidst a large group of people when I said to our professor, I just find this so amazing. I cannot even imagine myself being able to take a book by Marcus Aurelius, a famous Roman emperor, from the shelf and start reading his work. Well, neither can I, said the professor, just a little too loud, because Marcus Aurelius was the only emperor who wrote in Greek. We should regularly question the things we assume, because questioning them can lead to doubt, which can lead to curiosity. The question, how does it really work? Curiosity leads to research, and research leads to knowing. Now, mind you, it is okay to assume. You cannot know everything all the time. It is okay to assume as long as you realize you assume and don't tell yourself that you know. Now, the last piece of this puzzle we need before we can start predicting the future is what the historian does. Because what people like to do is reduce my 6 years of extensive studies of ancient culture and history to remembering a bunch of years and events. That is not what historians do. Wikipedia can remember years and events far better than any historian. What the historian does is study written sources left by our ancestors so that we can better understand the past. And historians have gotten quite good at this. Just as an example, the accounts on how the Second World War started are pretty precise and probably very close to truth. So we are really good at looking for meaning in the past and explaining why a thing has happened. And we are absolutely terrible at predicting the future or creating the future we want for ourselves. So what do we do? Where do we go from here? How do we incorporate our lessons of studying the past into our predictions of the future? Well, what if we reverse engineer the historian's task? What a historian does is look at something that has already happened and start tracing back to its origins. What if we do the exact opposite? We move into the future and start tracing back to the present to see how we got there. This is a method that can help you see the future before it happens. It helps you feel the impact of a decision you've yet to make. To illustrate a short example, I am a parent. I have 2 daughters of 2 and 5, the oldest of which made me this beautiful bracelet. And let's say they want to do something that I know will damage their clothes and make them very dirty. So I'd rather they didn't do it. But before I tell them no, I time travel in my mind 50 years into the future. I am now 83, and I'm reflecting back upon parenthood. Will this incident with damaging the clothes matter to me 50 years from now? It won't. I will have forgotten, although my girls might remember a certain freedom they were used to getting. Now, mind you, it will matter to me in 50 years that my girls generally learned how to behave. So I decide this incident is fine within the bigger context of them learning how to behave. And by doing so, I prevent an unnecessary confrontation. And if you are a parent, you know that that in itself is worth gold. But this method helps you make the decision you would have wanted yourself to make. Now, to feel the impact of this method, I'm going to need your participation now. So take a deep breath, sit up straight, relax your shoulders, because we are going time traveling. We will travel in our minds until we are 70 years old. You are 70 years old and you know there's less years ahead of you than there are behind you. Also, if you actually are 70 now, please don't take offense. From my point of view, that seems pretty old. So, we'll call it 70. You're 70 and you're starting to feel your age. You're maybe also a certain calmness, even wisdom. Confronted with your mortality, you reflect back upon your life. You look back, and there's things that make you proud. There's things that make you happy. But there's also things you might regret. It could be anything. It could be something you wish you would realize sooner was coming your way, not unlike Dutch army intelligence before the war. It could be a decision you would have wanted yourself to make a long time ago. It could be something you always wanted to say to someone but never did, like my aunt and grandmother. It could be the job you got stuck in that kept you from living your dreams. It could be anything that could make you tear yourself to pieces, like my aunt did when she realized it was too late. There was no way for her to ever remake that decision. Now take a few seconds to realize what this means to you. What decisions, what choices, what chances lie in your future, and will you be able to take them? Realizing that your actions today create the history of tomorrow, 2 weeks from now, and 40 years from now makes you realize the power you have to influence that future. Do not assume the future will become what you want it to become on its own, because you are the actor in the story. You are the reason the future becomes what it becomes. In psychology, this is known for various terms: mental imaging, positive visualization, self-determination, all ways of creating the future you want for yourself to work towards it. And it is shown in several studies that people who do this regularly are happier than the people who don't. In 1962, when John F. Kennedy announced there would be a precision operation to place a man upon the moon, he had no idea whether that would actually be possible. But by creating it in his mind and sharing it with others, he made it a feasible goal, something that could be done. So what is it that lies between you and future happiness? What choices, what chances, what precision operation of which you have no idea whether it's possible lies in your future? Because the years between now and 70 or 80 or 90 are yours to take, yours to do with what you will. Now I want to leave you with this. Do not assume that what happened to my aunt and grandmother, or even Dutch army intelligence, cannot happen to you. Because it's easy for us to say retrospectively that they made a poor decision. But at the time they had reasons for doing so. Reasons they later came to regret. I think collectively we are in a very similar situation. I'll give you one example out of many I could choose. Even though there is overwhelming evidence that our irrational, insatiable hunger for meat and dairy is damaging the climate beyond repair, we dismiss that evidence collectively. Surely, we say, it won't be that bad. Who knows? Maybe our children are the ones who get to wonder, what if? Winston Churchill once said, History will be kind to me because I intend to write it. In order for our future to be kind to us, we need to start writing it and stop assuming it'll happen on its own. The question is, will we be slaves to the historical cycle of repetition, unable to look past our own habits and prejudice, wondering, what if, until the end of our lives? Or will we realize our direct influence upon the future today, prioritize what is truly important, and break that cycle? I say, the future will be kind to us if we decide to write it. Thank you.